Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to this webinar on small claims mediation. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about MediateGuru, as some of you haven't joined us before. So apologies if you have already, you know what I'm about to say. So MediateGuru is a social organization led by members across the globe. Our aim is to bridge the gap between the public and litigation by spreading awareness as mediation as a future. We have conducted various successful webinars promoting mediation, and we strive to bring you the best lectures possible from the best speakers across the globe so that you can add value to your legal studies and your legal career. So without further ado, let me introduce today's esteemed guest, Ms. Nancy Radford. She is a SEND accredited mediator, a conflict management coach, a facilitator and trainer. She has a great mediation success rate of over 85%. She's also registered on the Civil Mediation Council for civil and commercial mediation and workplace mediation. She's a panel mediator for Kids Regional Mediation Panel and Collis Mediation, and she's a partner in Sommer and Partner Consulting. She also has specialist industry accreditation for property mediation, and she also has additional training in mediations with individuals who are elderly, vulnerable, and of limited mental capacity. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Nancy to take the stage and share her knowledge with us. Please remember, everyone, that you can ask your questions in the chat box below. We'd like to make this session as interactive as possible, and the feedback form will be sent at the end of the session. So over to you, Nancy.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for inviting me and for attending. I think MediateGuru is a great idea. So today I'm just going to share my slides. There we go. Hopefully you can all see those. I'm talking about small claims mediations and about how lawyers often perceive mediators as enemies, and as we'll talk about that. Today we'll look at kind of where conflict starts, where it's helpful to bring in a mediator. I'm going to focus on small claims mediations. I do a lot of those with businesses, particularly with family businesses and owner-managed businesses who are talking about what's a large amount of money to them, but is seen as a small amount of money to others. So today, I'll tell you a little bit about my background, because I have a bit of a different background. I didn't come into mediation from the legal profession. I came in through business. I'm going to talk to you about conflict and ADR and when ADR and mediation are useful to come in. I'll also talk about small claims and how mediators and lawyers can actually work together. And then I'll talk about things that conflict resolution specialists can do as well as mediation. And so this will take about half an hour, and then we'll have half an hour for you to ask questions. There will be parts in the slideshow where I'll ask you to respond either through chat or through a poll that I'll put up. So first, just a little bit about myself. My childhood, I think, set me up nicely to be a mediator because I was what they called a third culture kid. My dad was American, so I had the Halloween, but I was brought up in India, hence the little girl in the sari. That was me many, many moons ago. I've spent most of my adult life in the UK. I first worked in the health service as a nurse and mediator, helping fix people that were ill or broken and enabling them to go back to normal life, just as we do in mediation, helping people in problems to resolve them and to go back to normal life. I then did research into health service training, which is basically finding out what people need. So again, great practice for mediation. My husband and I bought a small business, which was a print business. Again, great practice, great training for being a mediator, because you have to balance the needs of people, of customers, the business, family, and making the business viable. We sold that 13 years ago, and I set up in business consultancy, initially helping businesses, mainly small businesses, family businesses, and charities set up and become more viable while still maintaining their values and their soul. And what I realized in this consultancy was that if relations don't work, people and organizations fail. So even if it's a husband-wife relationship that doesn't work, that impacts on the business. So 6 years ago now, I trained as a mediator, and I love it. It's absolutely the best job in the world. One of the things that was discovered through a lot of surveys, and if you're interested in finding out what makes people successful, have a look at the Grant survey. It's one of the longest running surveys, which was started back in the 1940s. And they took people from all different walks of life, and they did interviews for them every 2 years, and they looked at whether they were successful, whether they were happy, whether they were healthy. And I believe the survey is still going on. And what they found was that the biggest thing that indicated success and happiness and healthiness were warm relationships with people. For example, they found that financial success depends more on the warmth of relationships than on your intelligence. And those who scored highest on measurement of warm relationships earned an average of $141,000 more a year at their peak salaries. And there wasn't actually any difference in success or happiness between people who came from good backgrounds or bad backgrounds, or from high IQ or normal IQ. So relationships really matter. It's not just something warm and fuzzy. And that's why I feel mediation is so important. So we all know the conflict arc. You start with difference, and it gets faster as you go up the arc. What I'd like you to do is I'm just going to show a poll now, and I'll stop the slides. I'll show them. Let me see if I can just do this, right? And I'll start a poll. What I'd like you to do is, sorry, I've lost the poll. What I'd like you to do in the chat section is to indicate where you think people will call a lawyer. Would it be at disagreement? Would it be at problem? Would it be at dispute? Would it be at conflict? Or would it be at violence stage? So, Phoebe, are you there?
Hello, I'm here.
So, in the chat, have people put in where they think people call lawyers?
I'm just waiting for people to respond. So can everyone leave in the chat, please? Where do you think that you would call a lawyer? Would it be, which one of these stages would it be at? So one person says dispute. So number 4. Mm-hmm. We have several people saying number 4, dispute. Mm-hmm. Conflict.
Yeah.
We have dispute and conflict so far as the most common answers.
Yeah.
Anything else? More people saying dispute. Okay. Yeah. Dispute is the most common.
So roundabout at number 4. So just to go over differences, there's not usually a problem. Disagreements, when people start to see differences. Problems is when it causes one person a problem. Dispute is when two people have a problem. So lawyers are generally called in roundabout when both people see there's a problem. Now, I'd like you to do the same with the numbers, but put in where you think people should call in a mediator. Okay? So we're getting some responses there, Phoebe?
I think we need a minute. So
yeah, that's fine. So it's not where they do call in a mediator. It's where you think they should call in a mediator. So if you're calling in the lawyer at the dispute, where should you call in a mediator or a conflict resolution specialist?
One person has said problem. Oh, we have several people saying problem, stage 3.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. More responses coming in. One person has said disagreement, so stage 2.
Oh, some people are getting us in early. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, the most common is problem now.
Okay. So where do you think people actually call in a mediator? So we're talking about now. If you call a lawyer at 4, where do you think people commonly call a mediator?
So we're talking about mediation rather than going to court now.
We're talking about when people call a mediator, yeah.
Okay. People are saying conflict or dispute still.
Yeah. So what's happening nowadays, and what I think we need to change, is that most commonly mediators are approached by lawyers once they've already people have spent quite a lot of money trying to sort things out down the legal path, and then they call in the mediator. So I'll talk a little bit about litigation versus mediation, and then we'll have a look at why I think it's so important for you to start thinking about conflict resolution much earlier on the arc. So just to swiftly go through litigation versus mediation, I'll be talking generally about small claims, generally about things like workplace or the Special Educational Needs Tribunal. In all those 3 instances, in the small claims tribunal, the workplace tribunal, and special educational needs, people are expected to at least have tried mediation before they go to court. So this is where people are actively being encouraged to think about mediation before they go to tribunal. So the timescale, for example, for workplace mediations in the UK, there's a huge court backlog. They are now booking cases, I think, in 2022. So that's 2 years of having an ongoing problem. Mediation can be swiftly organized. For Special Educational Needs Tribunal, the court backlog is about 6 months. Mediation has to be arranged within a month. Some mediations, I've had a mediation that I've arranged within a week. So mediation's a much swifter process. The cost, litigation can be usually into thousands of pounds. It's more expensive hourly rate generally than mediation. Mediations, particularly for small claims or for special educational needs or workplace, tend to be a limited time and a fixed price, and generally the hourly rate is less expensive. In litigation, the power rests with the judges and with the lawyers. The participants are basically handing over decision-making, apart from, yes, they want the lawyer to go ahead or not. But with mediation, the power is with the participants. The mediator and even the lawyers are there to advise and guide the participants. They're not there to make the decisions. They're not there to decide on the outcomes. That power rests with the participants in mediation. With resolution in litigation, it's definite. The judge says that's the answer. Of course, you can appeal it, but for some people that is a benefit, that they don't have to make the decision. But it does mean that the decision has to be enforced, which can cost money. You know, if you get a judgment against someone in a small claims court and they don't pay, you then have to send in the bailiffs, which is an additional expense. With mediation, depending on the type of dispute, the average is about 85% resolved on the day. More of them are resolved afterwards, once people have had a chance to think about it. With special educational needs mediation, it's a much higher instance of it being resolved on the day. I have about a 90-odd percentage. With things like community mediations, that's a much lower percentage because you're talking about long-running disputes. What you also get is, even where the mediation isn't 100% successful, you can mitigate the damage. With regards to relationships, taking people to court always makes your relationship worse. With mediation, it's usually the same. Most often, it's actually improved because people see each other as people. I often start a mediation by talking about what they have in common. Parties come to mediation because they're both suffering. They both want the dispute to end. That is a big thing to have in common. And with mediation, we don't start with saying what the differences are. We start by saying, what do we agree on? What benefits both of us? So with all these positives, where does the resistance to mediation come in? I think lawyers see ADR as an appalling drop in revenue. They think that if they have litigation, they can make pots of money. If they go to mediation and it's solved quite quickly, not going to make so much money. A lot of clients don't even know about mediation. They think that it's just going to be, oh, I'm going to have to, you know, if I want £1,000 and they want to give me 500, we'll have to settle at 750. If I go to court, I'll get 1,000. And they want to punish the other people. They want to hurt them. What they forget is often this hurts the client as much as it hurts the other person, if not more. So let's have a look at small claims. In the UK, the usual definition of small claims is a claim of 10,000 or less. Lawyers are rarely involved at this stage. Clients are expected, before going to the small claims court, to have tried mediation first. There is a scheme with the Civil Mediation Council of a fixed fee, fixed time mediation scheme. And this starts at £75 per person for an hour's mediation. Now that doesn't sound very long, but if it's a simple dispute, it's quite easily solved. I've done quite a few of these, and at the time it was £50 per person. It's just gone up. So if a client has a dispute of £3,000, if he was going to a lawyer and going to court, it would cost him a lot of money. It probably just wouldn't be worth it. Some lawyers consider claims under 50,000 as small, and I know particularly bad debts of 30,000 the lawyers don't want to touch. Now, legal fees may actually exceed the money recovered by legal action in small cases. Often, employment tribunals are on a no-win, no-fee basis. So the client thinks, well, I'm not risking anything by going to court. However, what the client doesn't realize is that they still have to pay the legal fees, and the court might not award the legal fees. So in one case, a workplace tribunal awarded the client £5,000, but because there was some contributory negligence from the client, they didn't give them the costs. So the client won £5,000 and had to pay the legal fees of £7,000. So actually they ended up out of pocket. So this is where mediation could have saved the client much money. So in small claims, what happens is the client calls the lawyer. If the lawyer studies the case, they either take it to court, the client loses, the client's upset. If the client wins and the lawyer bills them, the client's upset. So if the lawyer rejects the case, the client's upset. So at the moment, for lawyers, small claims are a good way of upsetting the client. Now you think, well, does it matter that the client's upset? Well, if most of your work comes from word of mouth and the client tells everybody, don't go to that lawyer because it's just not worth it, and they're talking to someone with a big claim that you would love to have as a lawyer, then you think, oh, I wish I had a good way of handling small claims. So bringing in a mediator, mediators and lawyers can work together. So I often get a call because I'm on the small claims register of mediators, and people go to the court tribunal, they see, oh, I have to do mediation, and they look on the CMC website and they see my name for the area that they're in. They'll ring me up. I'll have a conversation. First of all, do you have contact details for the other person? Is the other person willing to mediate? And how much money are we talking about? Because if you're talking about £50, then there's no point going to court or going to mediation because it will cost you more to recover it. So in that case, I will give them the options. The client's okay to live with it and usually goes away quite happy because they've had someone listen to their problem. They've come to a decision themselves. They haven't been rejected. Others, if it's, say, £2,000 or £3,000 or more, I'll say, have you spoken to a lawyer or gotten some legal advice? So they then go to the lawyer. The lawyer gives them advice. If it's worth quite a lot of money, the lawyer might suggest that they take them straight to court. Or they might say, actually, mediation sounds a good idea. And with mediation, you have success, the client's happy, or mediation, they go to court and they feel, well, at least I've given it a try. So you end up with happy clients and less hassle for the lawyer. Even if the client calls the lawyer and the lawyer gives advice and sends them to mediation, the lawyer is saving a lot of time and hassle. So when is a good time to mediate? Not every case is right for mediation. If there's a clear legal case and the other person's obviously in the wrong, and you don't necessarily need to mediate. The good time to mediate is when the client wants to repair or maintain a relationship with the other party. For example, families in family businesses or where there's a disputed will. It might be quite clear legally that, the money's been left to one person, but that person might feel that's unfair, might still want to give some of the other family some money. Because they value that relationship with the family. For employees, if you have two employees that are not getting on, that's damaging the business. You don't want to lose either employee, so mediation's a good idea there rather than going to tribunal or disciplinary action. If you have a customer, especially if it's a major customer who hasn't paid their bills or is unhappy with a specific job, if you take them to court, you will lose that customer. You will possibly get the amount of money, but they will not use you again. So you've lost their lifetime value. And the same situation with suppliers. Another situation which is good to mediate is when things don't add up. So on the face of it, you think, well, why are they getting so upset about what looks like a small amount of money? Or it might not be financial recompense that they're looking for. It might be an apology. For example, with the NHS, a lot of times where there's been clinical negligence, many people want an apology and want to know that things won't happen again. And this is where mediation is often more satisfying to what people want and helps people to heal. Another time when it's good to mediate is when there's uncertainty about the outcomes or a high risk of losing the case. In this case, the mediator or the alternative dispute resolution specialist can help the client manage their expectations. So one legal firm had a lady come to them and she was very, very angry. She was unhappy that they didn't want to take the case to court. And they sent her to me for some conflict coaching. And we talked through what taking the case to court would cost her, not just financially, because she was prepared to pay the money because she wanted to punish the other person, but in terms of what it was doing to her life and her happiness. And this took about an hour. And at the end of it, she made the decision that actually she wanted to put it all behind her and accept that that was finished. So the lawyers were happy because they had a client who went back and said, thank you very much. I understand now why you didn't want to take it to court. And she had a lot of business which she then put the lawyer's way, which she wouldn't have otherwise. And again, small claims which aren't really worth the legal fees. We talked about how the lawyers could lose out. So what questions do you need to consider when you're thinking about whether a case should go to mediation or not? So first of all, what's the value and the cost? The cost of mediation, the cost of litigation, the value of the potential claim. And what are the key issues? Are they financial? Are they relationships? What would be, I always say to people, what's your ideal scenario at the end of this process? And then think about what's the best way. What are the risks of losing at litigation, your time frame, what it does to people's lives while you're going through the court process? It's not a pleasant process because in mediation, we try and take away blame. We keep it objective. In litigation, the aim is to prove the other person wrong. In mediation, our aim is to understand the other person's point of view and persuade them to do something that we want them to do. Both parties need to be willing to try mediation. In the case where both parties don't want to do mediation, people like me who do conflict coaching can still help, because you can help the party that does want to try mediation resolve what they want to do. Thinking about what are your no-go areas and what are your deal breakers. If there's absolute, one person is, I have to have this, otherwise it's not going to work, and the other person is, there's no way they're going to get that, mediation might be a waste of time. But, you don't know. People do change. And I've been in mediations where I thought they were miles apart, and we actually ended up with a deal. So it's thinking about, is there wiggle room? Is win-win possible? So mediation, if you're a lawyer and you're looking at strategies for mediation, they're quite different than strategies for litigation. So in litigation, you're trying to prove that you have the one truth. In mediation, what we'll have our interaction bit again, Phoebe, if you can join me. So what the question is, I'm going to do what I call the cheese exercise. I'm going to say cheese, and I want you to just put in a one word of the color you think of when I say cheese.
Okay, there's a slight delay, so we just have to wait a few seconds. What color do you think of when we say cheese? Yellow. Someone's put yellow. Mm-hmm. White. Mm-hmm. Cream, yellow, orange.
Yeah. So if cheese and truth are the same, which I often say to people. So say I was thinking, when they asked about cheese, I was thinking of Edam, which has a red outside. And Phoebe, you might be thinking of halloumi. Yeah. So you say, no, cheese is white. It's not red. Nancy, you are crazy. And I'm like, no, you're just being silly, So people often argue because they're thinking their word is, they're seeing it from one angle. And cheese is a great way, because if you're thinking of halloumi, you say, no, cheese comes from Cyprus. And I'm going, no, cheese comes from the Netherlands. So what we need to look at again is, you need to see my cheese and I need to see your cheese. So in mediation, I always talk to people about cheese. If nothing else, it makes them see that your truth and my truth can both be true. Yeah. And we look at, okay, so what makes it cheese? Yeah. You might say, is it the taste? Is it the process? So we're looking for what makes both of these the same. So thank you, Phoebe.
Thank you. That's an important point.
So one of the things that will always derail mediation is blame and finger pointing, which of course you're used to doing in litigation. That's what litigation is about. Defensiveness. So for example, if someone says, it's not my fault, the other person doesn't hear that it's not their fault. The other person hears, so it's my fault then. And you can see people getting very, very angry. So what we try to do in mediation is, I talk to people about building a golden bridge for your opponent to retreat over. So your role is not to prove them wrong. Your role is to help them see how helping you can help them. And that's a completely different strategy. And the best way to do that, this is from one of my mediation gurus, John Sturrock. And John Sturrock is fantastic. He has a great podcast and he goes over these tips in his podcast. He has a lot of tools, a lot of practical wisdom, and he's a tremendous mediator. So if you get the chance to read or listen to anything from John Sturrock, do. It'll be well worth your while. So he says that if you have someone who is very negative, very anti, the first thing to do is A, acknowledge their feelings, A, accept that it's their view. You may disagree with it, but they have a right to feel that way, that it's their truth. It may not be your truth. You may not see how it can be true, but it's their truth. Recognize the impact on them. So, you think, oh, I don't know why they're getting so wound up about cheese, but they are. They have a right to get upset about cheese if they want to. Reassure them that you're not there to hurt them. And we need to remember in conflict, people are acting to meet their needs. They are not acting to hurt you. Yeah, they think what they're doing meets their needs. And then explore a little bit what's going on for them. And finally, explain your view, but only when you have understood theirs. And if you use this, you can use it at home with someone that you're arguing with. You can use it at work with your boss. If you go through those steps, by the time you get to the last E, you will find that person is actually ready to listen to you. So ADR and mediators can help in a lot of ways. I always say to people, in the first 4, you can do training with people to help them manage crucial conversations. You can coach people if they're unhappy with the way they're dealing with a dispute and they might not want to involve the other person. Say it's their boss and they're worried about how that might affect their work. But you can provide coaching even if the other person doesn't want to get involved. And you can provide mediation in that role. So there's lots of ways that mediators and people with mediation skills can work in all different roles. So I'll stop the slides and we'll go for questions.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. That was very informative. We do have some good questions. So one person has asked, as a mediator, what are the essential skills to keep the parties calm and to help them gain our trust?
Right. One of the main skills is to be calm yourself, okay? Because calmness kind of radiates outward and they are trusting you to manage the process. The other thing is, I always meet with the parties individually beforehand and go through the process of tell me about the situation. Yep. So tell me about the situation. Tell me about the impact. Tell me what you need and tell me what you would like to achieve. So if I had a magic wand, what would you like? When people go through that process, they start sorting things out in their mind. They start calming down. They start seeing where they went wrong and what they could do. And I always say, so what you want them to do, how do you think, what could you do to make them more likely to do that? And you do that with both parties. When they come together, I found Kathleen's mediation guru talk on mediation ground rules really useful, because if you have people at the stage where they both want to help and you coach them to think about what's going to make the other person listen to you, what's going to make the other person want to do what you want to do, and keep that in mind through the mediation. You don't often need to come in hard-hearted. Sometimes you need to say, I did say that, I would butt in if I, felt that you were getting off track or if people were blaming, because we know that's not going to help us resolve it. So that's, it's about preparing yourself, preparing other people.
Thank you, Nancy. Another question we have is, what are the main differences between mediation, arbitration, and litigation, and what are the advantages of mediation?
Oh my goodness. I don't think we have time to get into all of it. I think there are some great websites that you can look at. Arbitration is similar, except you're not going to court. You have an arbitrator who decides. There's also things called med-arb, where you do mediation first, then you do arbitration if you can't resolve things. But basically, the main points of difference are in that table, and you're welcome to send the slides out to people. Yeah.
Of course, thank you. Another question we have is, as a mediator, how can you ensure that you remain neutral?
I think that's really important. And I always see that I'm there as a catalyst. If I feel strongly that one person's right and the other person's wrong, I would not take the case on. Yeah. There's a very interesting discussion on LinkedIn where Janine Akhtar asked, have you ever, as a mediator, had a case where the parties made a decision and you were, that's not right, that's unfair? And I think if you start letting your emotions, and I think this is where it's difficult for lawyers, because if you know something is, they would have won the case. But what you have to remember is the power is with the parties, as long as they are properly informed. I mean, obviously, if you're working with people who have limited mental capacity, you have to make sure that they are aware of the consequences. And if they're not, they need to be properly represented. But generally, we don't know what people are happy with. You have to reality test it, but it's not my place to say, oh, he's right, he's wrong. I don't know anything about the case. Yeah. So I think this is where the neutrality of a mediator is really important, because otherwise you cannot mediate.
Thank you, Nancy. Another question we have is, how can you persuade an unwilling party to continue with the mediation if they feel like they don't like the way things are going?
I don't try to persuade them to continue, because it is their decision. What I do say at the beginning of the mediation is, if any of you feel that it's no longer worth the mediation, you have every right to walk out. But can I ask that I have 5 minutes with you before the mediation? Before you do so, I'll have a private conversation with them. Because sometimes that's a key moment in the mediation. So usually I'll say to them, so what will happen now if you walk out? Yeah. What are your options? Yeah. Is this really what you want to do? Or do you want to stop for half an hour to think about something, make a phone call or whatever? I think I've done maybe 150, 160, something like that, mediations. I haven't had anyone walk out of one. I've had people feeling that it's not worth it. I've always given them the option to say, we're going round, and sometimes I'll say to them, we're going round in circles. Is it really worth continuing this discussion? Yeah. And then have private conversations with both of them. But it is important that I don't know whether continuing with mediation is useful for them. I just want them to be aware of, is this the right decision for you now? And also to say to the other person, this person will leave. Is that what you want to do? And if there's a special request, then they might say, well, I'm going to leave unless they do that, to put that request to someone. If they say there's absolutely no way I'm going to do it, that's both of their decision.
Thank you. That's very informative. We do have some questions about costs. So one question is, how does the cost concern for legal fees affect small business clients' decisions to mediate? Would you say?
I think one of the things that often is an issue is if one person wants to mediate and the other person doesn't, that the fact that the other person doesn't want to pay the fee. Yeah, because normally the fee is split between both parties. And sometimes people will say, well, I'll pay, their part of the fee. Yeah. But again, if they're going to court, it's going to cost a lot more, even if they pay both fees. So I think small business mediations, you have to be aware that you cannot charge the thousands of pounds that you can in big corporate mediations.
Thank you, Nancy. I do have one more question. We do have a few minutes left, so if anyone wants to leave some final questions down in the chat, then feel free to do so. I do have one question left for you, though. It's quite an elaborate one, actually, but I'll paraphrase. So in your experience, does introducing mediation pre-litigation potentially prejudice a client's position? So if the defendant takes the offer for mediation as a cue that the claimant doesn't want to go to court, could this cause the defendant to refuse any negotiations and force?
So you're kind of saying, if someone asks you to mediate, does that mean they think they've got a bad case? Is that?
Yeah, that is the gist of it, yes.
I think on the whole, if you look at what people come away from mediation with, if you look at the cost of going to court, so for example, I was in a mediation where it was two brothers who had farms, and it was about a lot of property. The mediation went on all day. The two brothers had not spoken for 12 years because they had argued about this for 12 years since their father had died, who owned what. And we had nearly got to a resolution. There was one house which they were arguing over the value and how much one would pay. And the difference between the two positions was, I think, £5,000. Yep. And they were like, nope, I'm not going any lower. Nope, I'm not going any higher. So one question I asked was, I just turned to the lawyers who were there and I said, how much would it cost for litigation just to put to take it to court? And they said £10,000. Yeah. So it was like, how about splitting it down the middle, chaps? You'll end up with more money. I think it's about also the costs. So if you are involved in a court case, particularly if you're a small business, this whole issue takes over your life. And if you're in a small business and your mind is tied up with court and being anxious and thinking about how you're going to pay the lawyers, your business is going to suffer. your family's going to suffer. So it's not just about, I've had people say, well, actually, they were contractually in the wrong. But what the client was thinking is, yes, I could have taken them to court and I could have won, but then I would have lost the client, would have lost the customer. I would have spent a lot of money on lawyers. And if you look at the lifetime cost, so I think it's not just about the money, it's about the cost in terms of health, and life and everything else. So, and of course, everything in mediation is confidential and without prejudice. So things that have been offered in mediation can't be referred to in court. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Nancy. I think that's about all we have time for today. All of your answers have been so elaborative and insightful, and there's been some really great interaction as well during the presentation. We will be inviting you back for sure.
Thank you.
I'm sure all of our viewers are very grateful. We've had some lovely comments in the chat. So I'd just like to speak to our viewers quickly now. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm glad that you've all enjoyed the session. Thank you for your lovely comments in the chat. Please remember to fill in the feedback form so that you can receive your e-certificates. And if you'd like to receive updates from us or keep in touch with us, then you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. We have a WhatsApp group too, which if you just message me or another one of our team, we can add you to the WhatsApp group for updates. So thank you again for coming, and I wish you to have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.